With the bonfire lit, the story begins. Nestled in the heart of West Virginia lies the quiet little town of Point Pleasant, shrouded in fog and mystery. Emily, a spirited young woman with red hair and green eyes, reports strange sightings near the old Hollow Creek Bridge. David, the skeptical journalist, analyzes old newspaper clippings about the legend of the Mothman. Agnes, the local historian, reveals ancient texts predicting the arrival of a dark guardian. A shadowy figure with glowing red eyes is seen near the edge of the forest, sending shivers down everyone's spines. Emily finds strange claw marks on the walls of an abandoned barn. Hank, the survivor, aims his rifle as rustling noises emerge from the dense brush. A colossal winged creature with glowing eyes emerges from the darkness, with an overwhelming presence. It was an autumn evening in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. The small town was enveloped in an unsettling silence, interrupted only by the rustling of leaves beneath Linda and Mike's feet. The couple had decided to take an evening walk to an old iron bridge, a decaying structure that had long been considered a landmark but also a symbol of neglect and imminent danger. As they walked hand in hand, an intense light illuminated the sky above them. Mike stopped, frowning at the source of the light, but what he saw next made his blood run cold. A giant figure with membranous wings like a bat hovered over the bridge. His eyes glowed an incandescent red, like hot coals, fixed directly on the couple. Linda tried to say something, but the sound was swallowed up by the night as a creature spread its wings and let out a shrill scream, something between an eagle's screech and a child's cry. Without thinking twice, they ran back to the city, tripping over roots and rocks on the way. When they finally reached the police station, their words were disjointed, but the message was clear. Something monstrous was stalking the bridge. The local sheriff, a burly, skeptical man named Hank, ran through the story with a raised eyebrow, before shaking his head in dissent. "Probably a large owl, or maybe you imagined things," he said, dismissing the couple. In the days that followed, Linda and Mike's story came together, but most residents laughed at the idea of a butterfly man. However, not everyone was so skeptical. Some people began to report seeing strange lights in the sky and huge shadows crossing the deserted streets at night. Tension in the city grew, and rumors of imminent tragedies began to circulate. Meanwhile, hidden in the silence of his room, Mike couldn't sleep. That creature's red eyes were burned into his memory. He got up in the middle of the night and went to the window. On the horizon, over the old bridge, he again saw the ominous glow of two red dots. This time he knew he wasn't imagining things. More than 200 miles away in Charleston, investigative journalist David Miller stared at a pile of useless papers on his desk. Time had been cruel to him. Once awarded for exposing corruption in large corporations, he now found himself writing mediocre articles for local blogs. The adrenaline of unraveling mysteries had disappeared, and with it his passion for the craft. It was then that his phone rang. On the other end of the line, a former colleague spoke with unusual animation. "David, have you heard about Point Pleasant? There's something going on there. Sightings of a winged creature, discoveries. It's the kind of thing you used to love. Investigate." Initially, David scoffed at the idea. "Mothman? Are you serious? It sounds like something from a cheap tabloid." But that night, insomnia won, and he began researching the city and its recent stories. The more he read, the more something awakened in him. There was something about those stories that felt familiar. Not just a mystery, but a pattern of human behavior he knew well. Collective denial before a great tragedy. Without thinking much, David grabbed his camera, a notebook, and his old leather coat. He was on the way to Point Pleasant before the sun even rose. When he arrived in the city, a heavy cloud seemed to settle over everything. The residents received him with suspicion. Suspicious looks followed him through the streets. Stopping at a small local restaurant, he ordered a coffee and began discreetly asking questions. "Have you heard of anything strange happening here? Maybe about a creature? With wings?" A waitress, an older woman with gray hair tied up in a bun, stopped cleaning the table and looked directly at him. "I don't know what you're looking for, but if I were you, I'd leave. This town has its secrets, and some of them are not meant to be unearthed." Before he could respond, an old man sitting in the corner let out a dry laugh. "Are you talking about the old bridge? I told you it's cursed. Anyone who messes with it ends up disappearing. But if you want advice, go talk to Hank. He's the sheriff. He knows more than he lets on." David thanked him and left a nice tip before leaving. He didn't know what to expect, but he felt he was on the right path. As he walked through the city streets toward the police station, he had the feeling that he was being watched. He turned quickly but saw nothing but a crow perched on a post. Still, that chill didn't leave him. When he finally arrived at the station, he found Hank, the sheriff, who seemed more bothered than concerned by the reports from the town. "Mothman, you and half this town need a psychiatrist. People like to make up stories when they have nothing else to do." But something in Hank's eyes told David he knew more than he was admitting. David was not intimidated. He decided he would investigate on his own, starting with the old bridge. He felt like the answers were there, hidden among the rusty steel and rumors that no one seemed willing to face. David arrived at the old bridge, parking the truck in a nearby vacant lot. The place exuded an oppressive aura. The steel beams were covered in rust, and the sound of the river flowing beneath sounded more like a lament than a natural flow. He walked up to the beginning of the bridge, taking photos and making notes about the place. As he explored, he saw something peculiar, strange marks on the metal and wood, like huge claws that scratched the surfaces. He bent down to take a closer look and noticed small black feathers scattered across the floor, stuck in cracks in the concrete. It was too strange to ignore. Back in the city, David decided to talk to more residents. He stopped at a convenience store and tried to talk to the owner, a middle-aged man with a suspicious look. "Do you know the stories about the bridge?" he asked. The man glanced at the counter but didn't respond immediately. "Look, everyone in this town knows something, but no one will admit it. Not here. Not for you," he said finally. Before David could insist, the owner of the establishment added in a low voice, "It's not that people don't believe. They just know that when this thing appears, something bad happens soon after." Intrigued, David continued his questions but met resistance everywhere. For most, any mention of Mothman was met with dirty looks or dry responses, as if the mere act of talking about him could cause bad luck. However, he found a small glimmer of hope in Emily, a young student who worked part-time at the local library. She confessed that she also heard strange stories growing up. But what intrigued her were the similarities between the recent sightings and an old town tale. They say that before the bridge was built, something similar happened. The Mothman has appeared several times. Shortly afterwards, a landslide occurred that destroyed half of the city. "But I don't know if it's true or just a story to scare children." David asked for more details, but Emily just shrugged. "You can look in the library archives. We have newspapers dating back to the time the bridge was built. Maybe you'll find something interesting." The next day, David spent hours diving through old articles until something caught his eye. One of the newspapers mentioned the construction of the bridge over ancient sacred indigenous land. He also recorded the disappearance of workers who had worked on construction, and others who reported strange visions of a winged figure in the darkness. Meanwhile, a strong wind blew through the library's windows, causing the lamps to flicker. Emily entered the room where he was, looking nervous. "Did you see that?" he asked. David furrowed his eyebrows. "That what?" She looked outside, pointing to the street. There was something out there, big, and it had red eyes. David ran to the window but saw nothing. Still, I felt the same chill that had bothered him the night before. He knew that somehow the city was hiding something much bigger than superstition or ancient legends. David left the library with his mind racing. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, but there was still a lot to discover. He decided to return to the bridge that night, hoping to capture some hard evidence. Equipped with a camera, recorder, and a flashlight, he walked to the site again, braving the biting cold and oppressive darkness. However, before arriving, he heard a deafening noise coming from the direction of the river. A shrill scream echoed in the night, followed by the sound of something heavy falling into the water. David ran, lighting the way with his flashlight. But when he reached the bridge, he found only emptiness. The current of the river was choppy, as if something huge had passed by. He felt that presence again, something watching, waiting. The next morning, the city woke up to devastating news. A school bus full of children plunged into the river after the driver lost control on a bend in the road near the bridge. Only a few children survived, and the details of the accident were disconcerting. One of the survivors, still in shock, murmured incessantly, "The red eyes. He was there. He saw me." David rushed to the crash site and tried to talk to Sheriff Hank again. This time, Hank looked dejected, the skepticism replaced by a grim expression. "I don't know what you're trying to prove, but this city has suffered. Enough, we don't need more people digging into old wounds." David insisted, but Hank decided to say more. The journalist decided to change his approach and spoke to Emily in the library again. She was also visibly shaken by a tragedy, but was willing to help. "If what you're saying is true, perhaps there's more in the files that we haven't seen yet. What happened during the construction of the bridge could be the key." Meanwhile, rumors spread among the residents. Some claimed to have seen the winged figure near the crash site. Others reported mysterious lights in the sky that same night. The city was on the verge of panic. David knew he needed to act quickly. He discovered that the tragedies were not coincidental, but signs of something larger and more sinister. He began to connect the dots. Every appearance of Mothman seemed to precede a disaster. But was he a harbinger of chaos or just a helpless observer? Or maybe he was trying to warn them? That night, as David reviewed his notes in his motel room, he followed footsteps outside. He ran to the window but saw no one. When he returned to the table, he found a black quill on his papers. It was bigger and thicker than any he had ever seen. Someone or something, and was making it clear that he was not alone. The presence of the black feather on his papers made David feel watched, as if the creature itself was playing with him. He held the feather in his hands and saw that even with the lights off, it seemed to emit a subtle glow as if it were alive. That wasn't natural. Determined to find out more, David returned to the library the next day, finding Emily with deep eyes. "You couldn't sleep either, right?" he said, trying to lighten the mood. Emily laughed nervously. "I slept, but I had a nightmare. A figure with red eyes was chasing me. When I woke up, there was a strange noise at the window, as if something had scratched the glass. Together, we began combing through older documents, expanding the search to indigenous records and historical maps of the region. It was then that he discovered something alarming. The land where the bridge was built was considered sacred by the natives. According to the texts, it was the domain of a guardian spirit, described as he who travels between the worlds. It was a powerful entity, which warned humans of the dangers of disrespecting the natural balance. David was intrigued. What if the Mothman was not the cause of the tragedies, but a warning? Maybe he's trying to warn people before something happens. Emily with a serious expression. "That's true. Why didn't anyone understand the warning? And why does he appear now, so many years after the bridge was built?" Before he could continue, a loud thump echoed through the library, as if something heavy had collided with the roof. Emily commented, and David ran outside, camera in hand. He looked up and saw a huge shadow quickly passing across the sky. The sound of flapping wings was frighteningly loud, and the red eyes glowed for a brief instant before disappearing into the darkness. Back inside the library, Emily was shaking. "David, this is going too far. I feel like we're confusing something we shouldn't be." But for David, this would only strengthen his resolve. He knew he would understand the pattern behind the apparitions before another tragedy struck. As the hours passed, he began to put the pieces together. Each person seemed related to the bridge or the area around them. The Mothman was somehow connected to the sacred ground, and tragedies only happened when humans intervened in that space. David felt that time was running out. Something big was coming, and he needed to be prepared. When I returned to the motel, that night, I found an anonymous note taped to the door. He just said, "Get out while you can, you don't know what you're dealing with." David read the note, repeating it a few times. Who would have sent that? Was it a threat or a genuine warning? He felt a knot in his stomach, but he knew that going back now wasn't an option. Instead, I decided to go back to the library in the early hours of the morning to research more. He knew that Emily would not accompany him at that time, so he went, alone, committed to unraveling the mysteries of the sacred ground. When I arrived, I found the library door ajar, even though it had been locked hours before. A chill runs down your spine. He entered, using his flashlight to illuminate the hallways. The bookshelves seemed taller and more oppressive in that darkness. At the back of the room, he discovers something strange. An old book, with a worn leather cover that was on a table as if someone had left it there on purpose. The title was intriguing, Dark River Chronicles. Leafing through the pages, David found detailed accounts of rituals performed by indigenous tribes in the region. One passage caught his attention. The winged spirit is neither friend nor foe. He is balance. When the earth is violated, he appears to warn. But if the warning is not heeded, the spirit brings destruction and retribution. David stood still, trying to process the words. He took photos of the pages, but as he read, something strange happened. The temperature in the room dropped sharply. The flashlight began to flicker. Suddenly, a deep rhythmic sound, like the beats of gigantic wings, echoed throughout the library. He looked back but saw nothing, and then he heard a whisper, like a voice coming from all sides at once. "You have been warned." Scared but determined, David ran out of the library with the book in hand. He knew he was facing something dangerous, but now there was a clear pattern. The Mothman doesn't appear by chance. He was attracted by imbalances, by the visibility of the sacred, and the construction of the bridge was the initial trigger. David decided to share his findings with Emily the next day. He showed photos of the pages and explained what he had felt in the library. Emily looked increasingly scared, but also convinced that something much bigger was at play. If Mothman is trying to warn us, what does he want us to do? We can't demolish the bridge or change the past. Before David could debate further, his phone rang. It was Sheriff Hank. His voice was tense, almost desperate. "David, we need to talk. Something happened at the river. You need to see it for yourself." David and Emily ran to the indicated location. When they arrived, they found several people gathered together, looking at the river with expressions of horror. A large rock, which had been buried under the water for decades, had emerged, and there were gigantic marks on it, symbols carved into the stone that merely represented a winged creature. The sheriff looked at David and shook his head. "You're right. He's warning us, but warning us of what?" David stared at the rock with the engraved symbols, trying to understand the meaning behind them. The markings were old, but the precision and detail suggested something deliberate, almost as if they were recently made. The winged figure appeared to represent Mothman himself, but the other inscriptions were enigmatic: circles, crossed lines, and what resembled burning eyes. "This is not a simple warning," David said aloud. "It's a message, but we need to decipher it before it's too late." Emily took photos of the rock while Sheriff Hank kept a crowd spread out. Despite initial skepticism, he now seemed confirmed that something beyond his understanding was happening. "I always heard stories about strange things around here," he confessed, "but I never thought it was true." While analyzing the photos, Emily remembered another document she had read. There were mentions of rituals performed by the tribes to placate the guardian spirit. Perhaps there is something in the historical archives that we can use to understand these symbols. Back at the library, the two delved into ancient records and Indian legends. They found a reference to a ritual called the Call of Harmony, which was used to communicate with the winged spirit and seek balance. However, the ritual was extremely dangerous and should only be carried out by those who would have the courage to face the consequences if something went wrong. The ritual involves fire, water, and earth, the three elements that support the balance of life, Emily explained. It appears that it is necessary to carry out this close to the source of imbalance, and that means the bridge. David knew this could be his only chance to understand what was happening and perhaps prevent another tragedy. He began gathering the materials specified in the ritual: specific herbs, a ceramic bowl, water collected from the river, and a torch. Emily hesitantly decided to help him, but Sheriff Hank seemed torn. If this goes wrong, you could cause something much worse, he warned. That night, David, Emily, and Hank gathered at the base of the bridge. The air was thick, and a mist began to form along the river, obscuring the banks. David placed the elements in the center of a circle of stones and lit the torch. He recited the words I found in ancient texts, his voice steady despite the fear he felt. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the wind blew hard, almost putting out the torch's flame. The sound of gigantic wings filled the air, and red eyes appeared in the darkness above the bridge, pairing up like demonic lightning. Emily spoke, but David remained motionless despite the winged figure. "What do you want from us?" he said. "We're here to listen." The creature slowly descended, its wings expanding like a shadowy cloak. David felt the entity's overwhelming presence, but instead of attacking them, the Mothman pointed one of his claws at the river. He then emitted a deep sound, almost like guttural singing, that reverberated throughout the valley. When they looked the direction they were pointing, they noticed something emerging from the waters. An ancient structure, covered in moss and mud, began to reveal itself. It appeared to be an altar, similar to the one described in the ritual texts. Emily gasps. "The altar. He wants us to finish the ritual here." David knew he was entering unknown territory, but there was no turning back. He looked at his companions and said, "Let's finish what we started." With the emerging structure of the river, an aura of tension and mystery surrounds the group. Water dripped from the altar in mesmerizing movements, reflecting the light of the torch that David held. He knew that every decision made there was crucial. It wasn't just an attempt to understand Mothman, but perhaps to prevent something catastrophic. Carefully approaching the altar, David saw rock-like symbols engraved on its surface. They glowed with a faint luminescence, as if they were responding to the group's presence. Emily, who brought the book with the ritual, began reading it out loud. It says here that the altar must be purified with the three elements: fire, water, and earth. Only then will the message be revealed. "Earth, water, and fire," muttered David, looking at the materials that were handed out. He took some wet earth from the riverbank and placed it on the altar. Then he poured the collected water into a central cavity in the stone. Finally, he held the lit torch above the altar, letting the flames dance as the wind swirled around them. The altar responded almost immediately. A deep, low sound echoed from the river, and the lights on the engraved marks intensified. Then something unexpected happened. A dense fog began to form around them, bringing hazy images that made it clear they were from another time. David, Emily, and Sheriff Hank watched, stunned, as the images told a story. They showed what appeared to be bridge construction, with workers clearing the area and ignoring warnings from a native shaman. A figure similar to the Mothman appeared, flying over the place, but was ignored or ridiculed. Then the scene changed to show the bridge's first disaster, when it had collapsed during construction, taking dozens of lives. "He tried to warn you from the beginning," Emily said, her voice full of awe and fear. "They didn't listen, and now we're paying the price." Before they fully understood what they were seeing, a new vision appeared, a terrifying image of something yet to come. The bridge was full of cars, but then, without warning, it collapsed again, this time taking an even greater number of victims. The vision disappeared as quickly as it came, leaving the three in sepulchral silence. "This isn't a warning. It's a prophecy," David concluded, his voice hoarse. "If we don't cause something, this tragedy will happen. He's giving us a chance to avoid the worst." But before they could discuss their next steps, the figure of the Mothman appeared again, this time just a few meters away from them. His red eyes glowed with intensity, and he made a sound that made the ground shake. Emily grabbed David's arm, terrified. "What does he want now?" David stared at the creature and realized it wasn't completely hostile. Despite the fear he provoked, there was an aura of urgency in his presence. It was as if he was waiting for something from them. He moved slowly and got closer. "We understand. We will do whatever is necessary to make this right." At that moment, the Mothman announced flight, disappearing into the darkness. But the air around the altar continues to vibrate, as if the ritual had not yet taken place. David felt he wasn't on the right path, but time was short. "The bridge, we need to stop it from being used. If not, all his warnings will have been for nothing." The group began devising a plan to alert authorities and close the bridge before it was too late. But they knew they would face skepticism and resistance. The clock was ticking, and the feeling that they were being watched never left them for a second. David, Emily, and Sheriff Hank returned to town with an overwhelming sense of urgency. The visions at the altar and the presence of the Mothman made clear that time was running out. If the bridge was not closed immediately, a few, perhaps hundreds of lives would be lost. But conceiving a city would not be easy. "I can't just close the bridge without hard evidence," said Mayor Barnes, a skeptical and pragmatic man. He listened to David's report with his arms crossed, his eyes narrowed. "You're asking me to make a drastic decision based on visions and legends. I need something more." David slammed his hands on the table in frustration. "Mayor, you don't understand. Mothman is real, and he's trying to prevent another tragedy. We've seen this before. We can't ignore the warnings." Hank intervened, trying to bring weight to the discussion. "Barnes, I saw the markings on the rock. I saw the altar emerge from the river. I'm not the kind of man who believes in legends, but what I witnessed cannot be explained any other way. And you know what happened when we ignored the signs in the past." The mayor hesitated, but before he could respond, Emily took out her cell phone and showed photos of the marks, the altar, and even a video that recorded the visions. The room fell silent. Although skeptical, Barnes seemed shaken. "Okay," he said, finally. "I will authorize a temporary closure, but only for 48 hours. If nothing happens in that time, the bridge will reopen, and you will need to face the political consequences." David knew this wasn't ideal, but it was a start. The announcement was made on the same day, causing outrage among residents. Many depend on the bridge for work and daily travel. News of horror stories and ridiculous legends began to circulate in the city, and David, Emily, and Hank became the target of criticism and even threats. Meanwhile, something more sinister was happening. David began to notice that the behavior of the people around him was changing. There was an inexplicable tension in the air, as if the closure of the bridge had awakened something in the town. Some people began reporting strange dreams, always involving winged figures and red eyes. "He's watching us," Emily said, looking out the window of the house. "I feel like Mothman isn't finished. The ritual at the altar wasn't enough. There's something more we need to do." That night, as David was reviewing his notes, the house was shaken by a loud noise. He ran outside and found marks on the door, large marks, as if something with huge claws had tried to get in. He looked up at the sky, but only saw darkness. "Sheriff." Hank arrived minutes later, visibly shaken. "I just got a call," he said. "There's something big and dark flying near the bridge. I don't know what it is, but people are scared." They drove to the location where a small crowd had gathered, even though the bridge was closed. When they arrived, they saw the figure of the Mothman hovering over the river, his enormous wings almost touching the waters. He wasn't attacking, but his presence was undeniably intimidating. David took a step forward, facing a creature. "What do you want from us? We already understand the warning." The answer came unexpectedly. The winged figure pointed one of its claws again and indicated the base of the bridge. David felt a chill when he realized that the place where a creature was pointing corresponded to a critical structural point. He understood immediately. The danger was not just the traffic on the bridge, but something even more fundamental. "He's saying the bridge isn't safe," Emily said. "Something is wrong with the structure. If we continue to use it, it will collapse no matter what we do." Sheriff Hank looked at David, understanding the gravity of the situation. "We need to alert state authorities. This is beyond us now." As Mothman disappeared into the darkness, David knew time was running out. The bridge was condemned, and they needed to stop anyone from using it, once and for all. The next day, news of the Mothman spread like wildfire. People were divided between panic and description. David and Emily were exhausted, but they knew they couldn't stop. They sent reports about the bridge's health to state authorities, but responses were slow. Meanwhile, time slowed down. "If we don't act quickly, it will be too late," David said, as he reviewed the images and videos that had been collected. "We have to prove the bridge is unsafe before anyone tries to reopen." Emily was reluctant, but there was a new layer of tension. She started to notice something strange in the videos. Whenever Mothman appeared, there were almost imperceptible flashes in the background, fleeting shadows that were still natural. "David, there's something else here," she said, pausing one of the videos at a specific frame. "Look at this." The frame showed the Mothman in flight, but behind him there was another figure, more difficult to distinguish. It looked humanoid, but it had no wings, just dark, threatening eyes. That's not him," David muttered, feeling the weight of a new revelation. "There is more than one force at work here." Meanwhile, Sheriff Hank has brought troubling news. "I got a call from the state engineers. They are saying the bridge has been in operation for months and is in good condition. There is no clear evidence that there is an imminent danger." "That's crazy," Emily said angrily. "They're ignoring all the signs. We need something they can't refute." Having decided, the trio returned to the bridge, this time with equipment to record and examine the structure. They went down to the base, where the Mothman had pointed out the night before. There I found worrying cracks that are reasonable. Worse still, there were inexplicable marks on the support beams. Marks that had been made by something strange and monstrous. "This isn't just structural failure," Hank said, running his hand over the marks. "Something or someone is sabotaging the bridge." Before I investigated further, I heard a deep, ominous sound coming from the river. It was like a roar, but it echoed underwater. Emily backed away, her heart racing. What was that? Suddenly, the water began to bubble, and a figure slowly emerged from the surface. It was humanoid, but grotesque, a mixture of flesh and shadow, with elongated eyes that resembled those of the Mothman. But this creature did not emanate the same aura of alertness. She looked like a predator. David left Emily behind while Hank drew his gun. "What the hell is this?" the sheriff said, keeping his sights on the creature. But before he could fire, the creature dove again, disappearing into the depths. "Now it's official," David said, breathing heavily. "We're not just dealing with a warning. We're in the middle of a battle between forces we don't even understand." The group returned to the city carrying videos and photos of the cracks and marks on the beams. Time was running out, but a new threat had emerged. Not only were they racing against the collapse of the bridge, they were racing against something they seemed determined to ensure would collapse, no matter the cost. David knew he needed help. He called a meeting with residents, asking everyone not to go near the bridge, but skepticism was still strong. "We cannot let fear paralyze us," said Mayor Barnes. "This bridge is essential for the city." Meanwhile, Mothman hadn't been seen for some time. David felt this could only mean one thing. The critical moment was very close. The atmosphere in the city became tense like never before. Even with the evidence collected by David, Emily, and Hank, resistance from the population and authorities was overwhelming. Mayor Barnes, under pressure from local residents and business owners, threatened to reopen the bridge the next day, claiming that the myths and unfounded fears had gone too far. David felt frustration burning in his mind. "We're wasting time. Are they going to wait until a tragedy happens to finally believe? Emily soothed him, holding his hand. We still have a chance. If we can get more people's support, we can buy time. That night, while working on a new plan, Mothman made an unexpected friend. This time, he was not in the skies or near the bridge, but right in the heart of the city. Residents said they saw the winged figure hovering over the church's ancient bell, illuminated only by moonlight. His eyes glowed bright red, casting a menacing shadow over the deserted streets. David and Emily rushed to the scene, accompanied by Hank. When he arrived, the sight was chilling. The Mothman was standing at the top of the tower, motionless like a living statue. He made no sounds, but something in the air seemed to pulse, a vibrant energy that left everyone present unsettling. Suddenly, the bell began to ring, although no one tried to pull the rope. The sound was serious and echoed throughout the city, attracting a small crowd of onlookers. The Mothman moves one of his wings, pointing towards the bridge again. David got the message. He's telling us we don't have time anymore. Tomorrow we'll... Too late. But before I could say more, a scream interrupted the moment. A woman in the crowd pointing to the sky began to tremble. It's not just him, there's more of them. Everyone looked in the same direction and saw smaller, but equally terrifying winged figures circling above the city. They seemed to be patrolling the skies as if they were preparing something. This has never happened before, Hank said, pulling David aside. Whatever is happening, it's escalating fast. We need to get these people out of here. As they tried to organize a crowd, the church bell stopped abruptly. The Mothman looked directly at David, his eyes seeming heated with intensity. Then, with a powerful flap of wings, he soared into the sky, disappearing into the darkness, followed by other creatures. Emily grabbed David by the arm. We have to get back to the bridge. There's something else there we didn't see. Safe, Hank. And we're taking backup this time. We can't go on alone. The next morning, the group gathered volunteers from the city, those who believed the evidence in David's words. They took flashlights, ropes, and safety equipment to fully explore the bridge structure before it reopened. Once there, I noticed that the river was unusually low, revealing parts of the base of the bridge that had never been visible before. As they approached, he found something horrible. Symbols carved into the stones, similar to those found on the altar. But these symbols were older, weathered, as if they had been made centuries ago. That's not just a bridge, Emily said, looking horrified at the inscriptions. It's a portal, and it's about to open. A distant roar echoed from the depths of the river, louder than any I had ever heard. It was the final warning, or perhaps the harbinger of something worse. The roar echoed across the valley, so intense that it seemed to vibrate within the bones of those present. David, Emily, Hank, and the volunteers stood transfixed, staring at the base of the bridge where the ancient symbols seemed to begin to glow with a pale, otherworldly light. The once calm river now boiled violently, as if something was about to emerge from its depths. That's not natural, said Emily in a tremendous voice. These symbols, they're reacting to something. We're witnessing whatever the Mothman tried to warn us about. Before anyone could respond, the sky suddenly darkened. It was broad daylight, but a strange darkness took over the place, as if an abundant and dense cloud had swallowed the sun. Throughout, winged figures appeared again, but this time in greater numbers. They weren't just flying over, they were surrounding the bridge. David grabbed his camera and started recording, while Hank yelled at the volunteers to stay away. Everyone back, this is out of control. Suddenly, the light from the symbols at the base of the bridge intensified, projecting extended beams into the sky. The water in the river began to spin in a whirlpool, creating a vortex that seemed endless. Something was rising, a giant, distorted shape that seemed impossible to define. It was a mass of shadows and pulsing light, constantly changing shape, but its eyes glowed the same intense red as Mothman's. That's what he was trying to keep us from releasing, David said, feeling his heart race. It's not just a collapse. The bridge, it's a collapsion of our reality. Emily tried to get closer to the symbols but was pulled back by Hank. "Are you crazy? I don't know what this can do," she insisted, pointing to the records. "If these symbols activated the portal, perhaps we can deactivate them." As they were arguing, a screeching sound cut through the air. One of the smaller winged figures descended at high speed, hitting the ground with enough force to cause cracks. It was a hideous creature, a fusion of human and beast, with membranous wings, sharp claws, and serrated teeth. She let out a deafening scream before heading towards the group. Hank fired, but the bullets didn't seem to hit their target. David and Emily ran, trying to escape the volunteers as the creature advanced. Chaos took over, and other creatures came down, as if protecting the portal. It was then that the Mothman appeared again, but this time he was not alone. He led a group of figures similar to himself, each with elongated eyes and imposing wings. They attacked smaller creatures, creating a fierce battle around the bridge. David couldn't believe his ears. "They are fighting for us," he murmured. "They're trying to close the portal." But time was running out. The giant figure in the vortex was slowly emerging, and the symbols continued to shine brightly. Emily, determined, ran to the base of the bridge with an iron bar, damaging the inscriptions. "If they activated this, maybe we can break the cycle." As she struck the rocks, a dazzling light emerged from the vortex. The deafening roar increased, and everyone present felt as if the world was about to shatter into pieces. And then, everything stopped. The light subsequently roaring ceased, and the vortex began to dissipate. The remaining creatures quickly fled, and Mothman landed next to David and Emily. He looked at them intensely before rising again and disappearing into the skies. David fell to his knees, exhausted. "We made it, at least for now." But Emily glanced at the bridge, where the symbols still glowed dimly. "This isn't over, we're just postponing the outcome." The sun began to reappear in the sky, but its glow seemed pale and distant, as if the light itself had been affected by the events. The bridge remained standing, but it was now a grim monument, marked by inscriptions and the remains of the supernatural battle that had just taken place. David, Emily, and Hank gathered the volunteers, many of whom were too shaken to speak. Some wanted to abandon the city immediately, while others murmured about the need to destroy the bridge before something worse happened. "We can't just leave," David said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "There's still something here. The portal may have been closed momentarily, but we don't know for how long." Emily, still looking at the symbols, said, "These marks are the key. They haven't disappeared, which means the danger is still here, latent." Hank, holding tight to his gun, looked between the two. "So, what do you suggest? Wait until it comes back, or try to resolve this once and for all?" Before he could respond, a deep, continuous sound began to echo from the bridge. It was almost imperceptible, like a rhythmic pulse coming from within the rafters. "Do you hear that?" Emily asked, tilting her head. David turned to the rafters, where the symbols were carved. He placed his hand against the stone and felt a faint but constant vibration. "It's like a beating heart. That's part of the portal. It hasn't been completely turned off." The volunteers recovered, fearing what could happen. "We can't stay here," said one of the residents, his voice shaking. "This thing is going to swallow us alive." "Then go," Hank replied firmly. "But for those who stay, we need a plan." David and Emily talked about their options. If the symbols were a key, perhaps destroying them completely could prevent the portal from reopening. But the idea of attacking the inscriptions seemed directly dangerous, especially after Emily's initial occurrence. "There's something we're missing," Emily said. "Mothman and those creatures were fighting, but why? If they wanted to protect the portal, why were they also trying to help us?" "Maybe it's not that simple," David replied. "Maybe they're stuck in a cycle, trying to stop something worse from happening. Or maybe they themselves are linked to the portal somehow." As they debated, a new figure appeared along, walking towards the bridge. It was an elderly woman dressed in simple clothes, but her eyes shone with an unusual intensity. She looked out of place, like she came from a different era. "You saw the warning, didn't you?" said the woman, her voice low but authoritative instructions. "The Mothman tried to save you, but what's coming is much greater." Hank aimed his gun instinctively. "Who are you, and how do you know all this?" The woman lost her hands, demonstrating calm. "I'm just a guardian. My family has protected this secret for generations. And now that the portal has been activated, my task is to help close this wound before it devours everything." David looked at her, intrigued. "Why didn't you show up before? Why only now?" "Because the moment has come. You weren't ready before. But now you have something no one else has. Courage and determination." She held out a small object wrapped in cloth. When David unwrapped it, it revealed itself to be a black stone, engraved with the same symbols as the bridge. "This is the heart of the portal," the woman explained. "If you destroy the symbols without first nullifying this stone, the portal will open completely. But if you use it correctly, you can seal it forever." Emily held the stone, feeling its energy pulse. "How? Do we know we can trust you?" The woman glows slightly. "You can't, but time is against you. Decide quickly." David exchanged glances with Emily and Hank. They were faced with a difficult choice: trust a stranger who seemed to know more than she was letting on, or risk destroying the symbols on their own. The bridge's pulsation grew stronger as time was truly running out. They knew they couldn't hesitate much longer. David, Emily, and Hank had no choice but to trust the woman. Her presence seemed to carry a weight of wisdom that was impossible to ignore. She was introduced as Agnes, a descendant of the first families that lived in the region. According to her, the symbols on the bridge were an ancient seal, created to contain an entity known as the Devastating Presence. The Mothman was a guardian, but over time, even the guardians were poisoned by the portal's power. With the black stone in Emily's hands, Agnes explained the ritual necessary to seal the portal definitively. "It's dangerous," he announces. "The stone needs to be placed in the heart of the symbols, but this will attract the attention of what is on the other side. The portal will try to defend itself. So basically, we're offering ourselves up as bait," Hank grumbled, loading his gun. "I love it." Agnes ignored him and continued, "You must work together. Any hesitation could cause the portal to expand, and there will be no turning back." The group returned to the bridge, now accompanied by Agnes. The volunteers disappeared, unable to bear the growing terror. The wind around the structure was charged with static electricity, and the pulsing of the symbols had turned into a constant sound, like the beating of a giant drum. Emily looked at David. "Are you ready for this?" David gave a nervous smile. "Definitely not. But honestly, when was the last time we were ready for something this crazy?" With a specific look, they positioned themselves. Emily held the black stone tightly, while Agnes drew a circle around the base of the bridge with a whitish powder. "This circle will contain some of the energy, but not all of it. You will feel the impact." When Agnes finished, she began to mutter words in an ancient, guttural language. The symbols on the bridge responded immediately, glowing with blinding intensity. The vortex in the river began to spin again, as if the portal itself knew what they were trying to do. "Put the stone down," contains Agnes. "Now!" Emily ran to the symbols at the base of the bridge and pressed the stone against them. At the same instant, a roar reverberated through the air, so powerful that everyone fell to their knees. An invisible force tried to pry the stone from her hands, but Emily held on tight, screaming with the effort. Suddenly the sky darkened once more, and the winged figures returned. But this time they were not alone. Furthermore, a huge pair of red eyes appeared in the vortex. It was the Devastating Presence, trying to get through the portal before it was too late. "Don't let go." Agnes, but her voice was drowned out by a deafening wind. The creatures began to attack, one of them charging directly at David. He rolled to the side, grabbing a piece of metal from the ground to defend himself. Hank was shooting, but the bullets barely made a difference. Emily screamed as she felt the stone heat up in her hands. The symbols came to crack, releasing a golden light that seemed to both purify and destroy. "It's working. It is significant. But I won't hold out for long," David ran to her, helping her hold the stone. "You're not alone in this." The cracks in the symbols spread, and a screeching sound echoed as if the portal itself was screaming in agony. The vortex began to contract, but the red eyes positioned fixed on the group, promising revenge. It was then that the Mothman appeared, again. He descended from the skies, landing among the group and the creatures. He let out a high-pitched scream, almost like a command. The winged figures hesitated for a moment before returning, obeying what appeared to be his order. The Mothman looked directly at Emily and David as if encouraging them to continue. "He's helping us," exclaimed Emily. But before that could happen, the devastating presence advanced. A mass of darkness began to emerge from the vortex, defying the light of the symbols. Agnes said, "Quickly, not long." David and Emily pushed the stone with all their might as the portal resisted. The tension in the air was almost unbearable, and the sound around them seemed to be reaching a deadly crescendo. And then suddenly, a light exploded. A wave of energy came out of the bridge, pushing everyone back. The creatures disappeared, and the vortex was sealed with a final resonant sound. The symbols, now completely cracked, were erased forever. Emily, panting, looked around. "We achieved," Davy appealed slowly, helping her to stand up. "It seems so, at least and for now." But deep down, everyone knew there were still unanswered questions. Agnes looked silently at the horizon as the Mothman disappeared into the sky again. The group fell silent, watching a now destroyed bridge. The golden light that had emanated from the symbols had disappeared, leaving only black marks engraved on the stones. Despite the apparent end of the portal, the surrounding environment still seemed charged with something inexplicable, a remnant of darkness that persisted. "Is it really over?" Hank said, gripping his gun tightly. His eyes scanned the sky, fearing that something was still lurking. Agnes, still up to speed on her makeshift staff, finally breaks the silence. The portal was closed, but the power that emanated from it did not dissipate so easily. "This place will remain marked for a long time." David sighed and ran a hand over his face. "So that means it's not over, does it? Could everything we've done be temporary?" Agnes nodded, her eyes sad. "The portal may not open again, but the devastating presence left a fragment of itself here. That is why the Guardians, like the Mothman, exist. They watched, containing what still slips through the cracks between the worlds." Emily looked up, at the sky, still shrouded in an unsettling gloom despite it being daytime. "But why did Mothman help us? He seemed to fight those creatures but also protect the portal." Agnes hesitated before answering, as if carefully weighing her words. "Mothman is neither completely good nor completely evil. He was created by the portal as its original guardian, but something changed over the centuries. He began to understand the pain the portal caused the human world and tried to mitigate it." "There," David frowned. "So he's also a victim of this?" "Exactly," replied Agnes. "But that also means he could change. If the presence finds a new way to exert influence, even he could be harmed again." Before he could continue, the wind began to blow erratically again, bringing with it a low sound, almost like a suggestion. Emily immediately picked up the black stone which she was still holding and discovered that it was cracked. "Agnes, what does this mean?" The woman moved, analyzing the crack in the stone. His eyes widened with something close to fear. This shouldn't have happened. The stone was the ultimate seal. If it's cracked, it means something held out until the end, something that wasn't completely contained. David took a step back, feeling a chill run up his spine. "Are you saying the presence is still here?" Agnes gestured for them to be silent. Not exactly, but a part of her, a shadow, an echo, may have escaped before the portal closed. Emily threw her hands to the side in exasperation. "So we're back to square one. Now what? How do we deal with this?" Agnes took a deep breath. "That crack is a sign that there's still work to be done. But this time, you're not alone. Mothman is still out there, and he will keep watch. But be careful, because that also means he can change from ally to enemy, depending on what happens from now on. Or maybe she doesn't even know everything, Hank replied while sharpening a knife. He remained restless since the night on the bridge. But whatever it is, I feel like we're still in the middle of it. That thing, the presence, hasn't given up. That same night, a strong storm swept through the city. Lightning lit up the sky and the sound of thunder seemed to echo like an omen. David, unable to sleep, went out onto the porch to watch the rain. As he looked toward the horizon, a flash of light revealed something on a distant hilltop. A lone, motionless figure. "Emily! Hank!" he said, running inside. "There's someone out there on the hill by the bridge." The two quickly joined him, and together they grabbed flashlights and weapons. "This isn't just a coincidence," Emily said as she put on a jacket. "If someone is there, they could be connected to all of this." When he reached the top of the hill, the figure had disappeared. But he found something even more disturbing. Marks on the ground, similar to the symbols on the bridge. In the center of them, there was a small pile of stones, arranged in a ritualistic way. Emily knelt down, shining her flashlight at the formation. "This wasn't here before. Is someone trying to recreate the seal?" Hank turned quickly, pointing, his gun into the shadows. "We're not alone here," he murmured. Before he could react, a low, guttural sound came from the trees. It was similar to the roar they heard on the bridge, but weaker, like a distant echo. "Koran!" David understood, and the group hurriedly descended the hill, noticing the darkness, pursuing them. Back at the cabin, Agnes was already waiting for them as if she knew exactly what had happened. "You saw the marks, didn't you?" she said, her voice dark. "Someone or something is trying to reopen the portal." David was breathing hard. "But why? The portal is closed. The seal has been broken, but the portal is supposed to be inactive." Agnes looked directly at him, her eyes shining with an intensity that made him shudder. "The portal is never truly inactive. It is dormant, waiting for the next opportunity. And if someone is trying to wake it up, that means they are being manipulated by the presence." Emily with the black stone in her hands, which now felt heavier than ever. "So we need to stop this. We need to find whoever is doing this and stop them before it's too late." Agnes nodded slowly. "But there is something you need to know. The presence does not choose its servants at random. It finds those who are already vulnerable, those with doubts and fears, and turns them into its agents." David, Emily, and Hank looked at each other, the weight of Agnes's words reciting over them. The battle was not just against something external. It was against human frailties themselves that could be exploited. "So that means anyone can be harmed," Hank said in his low voice. "Yes," replied Agnes. "Anyone." Tensions rose as the group tried to unravel the mystery behind the presence's new brands and hidden goals. David, seeking to find answers, revisited the ancient legends of the Mothman in search of clues that would connect current events to something that could deter the threat. "There are records of people who claim to have been influenced by him," David said, scattering newspaper clippings and notes on the table. "But what if it wasn't him directly, and these people were being manipulated by something bigger?" Agnes watched silently, her expression grave. "The presence uses fear as its main weapon. It does not need to appear physically. The simple act of implanting an idea can be enough to unleash chaos." Emily closed her eyes for a moment, trying to organize her thoughts. But if Mothman was created as a guardian, how did he find himself in this now? He helped close the portal, so why does he seem to be connected to all of this? Agnes hesitated before responding, her voice carrying regret. "Because he is no longer the guardian he used to be. Part of him has been corrupted over the centuries, and the presence takes advantage of that fragility. He is both a weapon and a victim." Before he could continue the conversation, a scream echoed outside the cabin, cutting through the silence of the night like a knife. The group rushed to the door, their flashlights illuminating the darkness. There, in the middle of the muddy road, was a disoriented-looking woman covered in mud and dried blood. "Please help me," she said, her hands shaking as she pointed towards the forest. They're coming." Hank was the first to reach her, trying to calm her down while Emily and David checked their surroundings. "Who's coming?" Hank asked, his voice firm but gentle. "Those red eyes, they watched me in the forest and then... Voices. They told me to lead the way," the woman replied, her eyes wide with terror. Agnes moved slowly, her eyes fixed on the woman. "You heard voices, didn't you? What exactly did they say?" The woman began to cry, her voice barely audible. "They said I had to bring the stones, place them in a circle, and then the portal would open again." Emily got involved. "She's being manipulated by the presence. This confirms what you said, Agnes. They're using vulnerable people to do their dirty work. But that means she's not the only one," David concluded, feeling the panic rising in his chest. "If they are recruiting others, we could be dealing with something much bigger than we imagined." Suddenly, a bang resounded through the forest, as if something giant had fallen through the trees. The group turned instinctively, pointing their flashlights into the darkness. Atop a nearby hill, the unmistakable silhouette of Mothman appeared, his wings spread like a monstrous shadow against the moonlight. "He's watching," Hank said, raising his gun. "But he's not attacking." Agnes placed her hand on Hank's shoulder. "Don't shoot. He's here for a reason. He's warning us." The Mothman stepped forward, and for a moment, his red eyes shined directly on Emily. A strong wind blew through the forest, carrying leaves and dust in all directions. Then he disappeared, as if he had never been there. David closed his eyes, trying to process what had just happened. "If he's warning us, then we're running out of time. We need to find out where this is going to happen before it's too late," Agnes agreed. "And we need to be prepared, because the next time we meet him, he might not be here to help us." The events of the previous night left the group even more determined, but also destabilized. David spent the night analyzing the maps and symbolic marks I discovered. He cross-referenced information with old reports about Mothman sightings and unexplained activities in the Point Pleasant region. "If my theory is right, the next ritual won't be in a random place," he said, pointing to a map on the table. "These stone circles are being strategically invested. Look at this. The Silver Bridge was the first point, but now everything converges on the old well, an isolated area in the forest." Emily frowned. "The old well? Wasn't that closed decades ago due to a landslide?" "Yes," David confirmed, "but what's buried there is even older. It's indicated in indigenous texts as a place of power. If the portal is going to be reactivated, that's where it's going to happen." Hank, who was sharpening a knife near the window, interrupted. "If we know where they're going to attack, we have the advantage. But honestly, the four of us against whatever's coming doesn't look very exciting." Agnes, who had been quiet until then, cried out slowly. "There are more of us than you think." His cryptic statement left the group confused. "I am not the only one who fights against this. There are other worshipped guardians. People who, like me, carry a memory of ancient battles against this force." David was silent, processing her words. "Are you saying you have allies?" "Yes," she replied, her voice firm. "But awakening them comes at a price. They've forgotten who they are and led normal lives for years. Reawakening them means bringing them back to a world they swore to abandon. But now we have no choice." Agnes left the cabin and returned a few minutes later with a small metal safe. When they opened it, the group saw what appeared to be quartz crystals glowing faintly. "These stones are fragments of the original portal, separated centuries ago. They can awaken the Guardians and give us a chance." Hank sighed, crossing his arms. "And what happens if this doesn't work? We're dealing with something we don't even know how to fight." Emily went straight to him. "This isn't about what we can or can't do. It's about what we need to do. If we don't try, everything we know could be destroyed." Reluctantly, Hank found, and the group decided to leave at dawn in search of Agnes's possible allies. But as the sun rose, they realized something was wrong. A thick, strangely oppressive fog surrounded the cabin, covering everything around it. "This isn't natural," David muttered, picking up his camera to document the specific. Suddenly, a deep, vibrating sound, like a primordial drum echoed through the forest. Emily removed a gun as Hank positioned himself near the door. "We are being surrounded," he said. "I can feel it." From within the fog, shapes appeared like human figures, but disturbingly wrong in appearance. Their eyes glowed red, and their movements were clumsy, as if they were puppets. "They were taken over by the presence," Agnes said, her voice thick with sadness. "They are no longer human." "So what do we do?" Emily asked, her voice full of panic. "We ran away," David replied quickly. "Now is not the time to fight. We need to get to the old well before they do." The group grabbed their things and ran outside, breaking through the fog as the figures followed in their footsteps. The sound of breaking branches and distant screams surrounded them, but they kept running, determined to survive. When he finally came out of the fog, he reached a high point where he could see the forest below. David, panting, assigned to the horizon. "There's the old well," he said, walking down a clearing surrounded by weathered rocks. Agnes took a deep breath, holding the crystal in her hand. "We are close to the end, but the worst is yet to come." The group went down the slope towards the old well. The clarity that sheltered him was surrounded by ancient, twisted trees, whose shadows never stopped moving regardless of the wind. The place exuded a feeling of antiquity, as if it carried the weight of events forgotten by time. Upon reaching the edge of the well, Agnes knelt, placing the quartz crystal in the center of the circle of stones. "These fragments need to be positioned correctly to work. It's our only chance to stop the portal from opening again." David analyzed the site with his flashlight, noticing ancient symbols engraved on the stones surrounding the well. "These drawings look like instructions," he said, pointing to the intricate patterns. "They show how the portal was last closed." Emily and Hank stood guard while Agnes and David worked. "We're being watched," Hank said, looking up into the trees. His trained eyes noticed quick movements among the shadows, but nothing concrete. "They know we're here." Suddenly, the sound of a human scream echoed through the forest, coming towards the clearing. A figure emerged from the darkness. It was the woman who had been found the night before, but something about her had changed. His eyes were empty, and his expression was cold. In her hands, she held a stone similar to Agnes's, but it emanated a dark, disturbing light. "She has the wrong shard," Agnes whispered, eyes widening. The presence sent her to bring a harmful element to the ritual. The woman began to walk towards the well, muttering incomprehensible words. David stood in her way, trying to stop her. "You need to stop. This will destroy everything." But before he could reach the woman, another figure appeared from the trees. The Mothman. He landed on the ground with a thud, his gigantic wings blocking out the moonlight. Its red eyes stared straight at Agnes, as if waiting for something. "He's here to decide," Agnes said, her voice shaking. "It is the key to determining whether the portal will close or open." The woman with the corrupted stone extracted from the artifacts, and a wave of energy ran through the clearing. The ground began to shake, and the pit emitted an ominous glow. "We're running out of time," David clarified. Agnes held the crystal tightly and walked to the center of the circle. She gestures her arms, beginning to sing an ancient song in a forgotten language. "These words have been passed down from generation to generation," she said, her voice echoing preternaturally. "They seal the power of the presence." The Mothman slowly advanced, standing between Agnes and the corrupted woman. He seemed torn, his body trembling as if he was fighting internal forces. Then suddenly he spread his wings, letting out a deafening scream. "He's trying to protect us," Emily shared, responding to the ears. But a corrupted woman continues to advance, her body being consumed by dark energy. When she reached the well, the dark glow intensified, and a crack opened in the ground. From it emerged shadows that moved as if they were alive, their eyes glowing red. "These are the sentinels, the presence," Agnes said, her eyes wide with terror. "They are emissaries of chaos." Hank shot one of the creatures, but the bullets passed through its body as if there was smoke. "None of this works. What do we do now?" David picked up the crystal that Agnes had left on the floor and ran to her. "If Mothman is trying to help us, We need to use him. He's the key, remember? Agnes agreed. But that will require a sacrifice. He needs to absorb the crystal's energy and use it to destroy the portal. But that could kill him. David looked at Mothman, who was now fighting the Sentinels, protecting the group. If he's made it this far, he already knows what he needs to do. With tears in her eyes, Agnes turns to the Mothman. You are the Guardian. Show us your true strength. The Mothman stopped struggling and looked at Agnes. He slowly advanced towards her, lowering his immense head, as if he understood her call. David placed the crystal in his shaking hands, feeling the intense heat emanating from the creature. When Mothman held the crystal, a powerful light emanated from his body, illuminating the entire clearing. The Sentinels even retreated, their high-pitched screams echoing in the night. Mothman's glow grew more and more intense, bathing the clearing in a pulsating light that seemed to consume the shadows around it. The present Sentinels dissolved into piercing screams, unable to withstand the released power. However, the ritual was still incomplete. The crack in the well continued to grow, and a supernatural wind emanated from there, bringing voices from a distant and threatening world. It's working, but it's not enough. Agnes spoke, her voice shared with despair. He needs to channel all of the crystal's power to seal the portal. But that could destroy him and us too. David looked at Agnes and then at the Mothman, whose wings fluttered, charged with light energy. He's giving us a chance, David said. But we have to do our part too. What else can we do to help you? Agnes hesitated, but then answered, her eyes full of pain. The presence of the portal is a force that feeds on fear and despair. If we are to strengthen it, we must face it without giving in. We must place ourselves between the portal and the darkness, giving everything we are to help the Guardian. Emily took a deep breath and took a step forward. If that's what we need to do, then let's do it. She stood in front of the well, facing the growing crack and the shadows that were still trying to escape. Hank, hesitant at first, soon audible, muttering a silent prayer as he wielded his unused knife. David and Agnes joined them, forming a barrier around Mothman. We are with you, said Agnes, looking directly at a creature whose expression seemed to recall a mix of determination and grief. The Mothman announced flight, pairing above the well. Its wings radiated an almost unbearable light, as if they were made of pure celestial fire. He let out a devastating scream that reverberated through the forest, breaking branches and silencing all surrounding sounds. The crystal in his hand exploded in a flash, releasing a wave of energy that reached the edges of the clearing. The crack in the well slowly began to close, but with that, a new problem arose. The portal resisted, as if it were a conscious entity, fighting to remain open. The wind intensified, dragging leaves, stones, and almost the group itself into the crack. Emily held on to an exposed root, screaming to be heard. We can't hold this for long. The Mothman, now completely enveloped by the crystal's energy, descended towards the well. He dove into the crack, taking with him all the light and power he had accumulated. A deafening boom echoed as he disappeared, and the portal finally shattered, leaving only a deep, eerie silence. The group fell to the ground, exhausted and injured, as the residual glow of the ritual slowly faded. The well was now sealed, the stones around it marked with luminous icons that slowly faded. He's gone, Emily said, looking at the spot where the Mothman had disappeared. He sacrificed himself to save us. Agnes knelt down, placing her hands on the floor. He fulfilled the role he was given, but that doesn't mean the fight is over. We just bought time. David looked up at the sky, which was now clear, the stars shining brightly. Whatever the case, today we did our part. It gave us a chance to keep fighting. As the group walked away from the well, now just a forgotten relic in the forest, a shadowy figure watched them from a distance. His eyes glowed red, but they weren't Mothman's, and a sentence in the wind passed through the air. You just postponed the result.